Good to have you with us. I'm Kathy Choi at Real Talk.
What's going on? This is Danny Cho. Well, today's episode is dealing with the LA riots. It happened in April 29th, 1992. I remember I was about 10 years old, and my parents and my uncles, they were all in the liquor store business, and they were somewhat affected by it. So it's going to be 20 years next year. So let's see how LA has grown since then, and hopefully for the better. So let's meet our guests.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have all of you here with us today. Thank you for coming. Please, if you could take a moment and introduce yourselves for our audience.
Yeah, my name is Rodney King, and I was in 3/3/91, was March 3rd, was a beating in Los Angeles with the police, LAPD.
I'm Bernard Parks. I'm a councilman, 8th District. I represent the area of Florence and Normandy that was the center point of the riot. And now, at that time in 1992, I was a police officer with the LAPD, and at that time worked in an area that covered Koreatown and most of the downtown business area.
Hi, I'm Sukhee Kang, Mayor of Irvine. I came to America as a first-generation immigrant. At the night that I was watching TV in 1992, that really changed my life. I started getting involved with the Korean community, and now I'm serving as a mayor of the city of Irvine.
Hi, I'm David Kim. I'm a Korean American attorney. I was an attorney at the time, and I witnessed the riots firsthand. And since then, I have produced a documentary from the Korean American perspective called The Clash of Colors.
Mr. King, what have you been up to for the last 20 years?
Oh man, I've been up to a lot in 20 years. I've just been spending a lot of time with family, and getting used to doing little speeches here, and living life. Like things are starting to look up, in my life, and I'm happy today.
Mr. King, I know it's a very painful memory, but a lot of people believe that the event that you were involved in was kind of the chain reaction to the LA riots. And could you kind of briefly tell us what happened? I
happened to be at, I would say, the top of the boiling pot of civilization, of people, really trying to get together and find their place. And I think what happened to me has changed a lot of situations in Los Angeles and California, and for the better. A lot of good things have came out of it, and I'm really proud to be living in these times and days to see the progress that has came out of such a horrible situation that night.
How did the African American community react to what happened to Mr. King?
Well, I think you had probably a very diverse view. There were those, just like in any society, and I think the primary issue I got out of it in talking to the public, that video validated in many people's mind what they thought was going on for decades. And if you kind of follow the issues of police brutality or what people perceive as police brutality, it's not by department or uniform. People kind of collectively deal with law enforcement as a group. It doesn't even have to be in the same city or state. If they see something happen on video in Texas, they say, that's what I believe happens in law enforcement. That video was the single most important thing that said to the black community, we've been telling you about this for decades, we've experienced this for decades, you now have finally seen it and you can't deny it. And I think that was the key factor of how people begin to express themselves and let people know this is what we've been talking about.
What was the reaction of the Korean American community?
One thing that I think that the Korean Americans learned after the riots was the fact that the country that they believed to be the most civilized country in the world, to which they had immigrated, when the riots occurred, the LAPD was nowhere to be seen. I mean, unfortunately, Councilman Parks was a police officer at the time, but they were in disarray. And there were, the Korean American merchants had to defend their stores on their own because the law enforcement was not there to protect them. And another thing that they discovered was that the Korean American community became the target of the violence. A lot of the, we understood that when the riots took place on April 29th, that it started in South Central Los Angeles. Everybody was angry because, as we have here, Mr. Rodney King, who was the person who was beaten by the police, and then the trial had acquitted the police officers. And as a result of that, African Americans were angry that, that the system was not working, and that, so they were angry at the police. But it turned, as the night the following day, for example, the riot spread to Koreatown, and they saw that the Korean market owners were targets of the violence, and then the gangs and the looters came up to Koreatown, and Koreatown became the target, and Korean Americans assumed that the LAPD, which may have been reluctant to go into South Central to protect the people there because they would be the target. When Korean Americans became target, you would think that the LAPD would come and protect the Korean American merchants, but that didn't happen. And for the Korean Americans, it was an eye-awakening experience where they recognized that maybe they're being treated as second-class citizens.
What was the temperature of the community at the time during the LA riots?
It was a lot of mixed feelings. And I had whites come up to me and tell me, I'm so sorry for what happened, man. I'm embarrassed to be white today, man. It was just a lot of mixed feelings, and it was scary for me. I stayed in the house. It was for my own safety, you know. They were shooting at policemen, and everybody was getting shot at. So it was no safe place whatsoever to be out there on the streets. Law enforcement had told us early on that it wouldn't be safe to be outside. So that's why I stayed in.
So Mr. Kim actually alluded to the fact that the police department didn't show up to protect the Korean American citizens. Mr. Parks, as a former member of the police department, can you speak to that and what was happening there at the police department at the time?
I think I think every community in the city thought we didn't show up, because to see this incident, say on Florence and Normandy, explode in South Los Angeles, Hollywood exploded, the Valley exploded. Where I was standing in front of Parker Center, you could not get a car dispatched. You couldn't get a police officer. And it took roughly about 12 hours to mobilize the police department and bring resources in to where you felt there were enough resources to actually address the issue. I think the police department made a couple of mistakes early on, understanding that the trial was going to end that day and we got in for warning. The department should have gone on attack alert and kept all of its resources that came in on that day shift at work and allowed the night watch, so you'd have double shifts until you felt as though the city was basically calm. When you allowed the day watch to go home and there's only night watch officers, and then the 12 hours it takes to mobilize, those were the times in which every community in the city thought they were being abandoned. But one of the things I think is pretty clear in my mind, that there were not officers that basically refused to respond or that the resources were kept out of the community. They just was overwhelmed in the first probably 48 hours to 72 hours of getting your arms around this incident.
Well, I think in fairness to the Los Angeles Police Department, I think I did say that the Korean Americans felt that they were abandoned, and as Councilman Parks pointed out, a lot of people felt that way, and I think one of the reasons is that the media had basically shown that you could get away with looting and that the police was not able to really stop the looting. And at the same time, I think one of the LAPD was also, I'm sure Councilman Bernard Parks would be willing to admit, and that is the leadership of the LAPD was really not prepared for something like this. And I think partly because of the media attention that the Rodney King beating had received. I think people assumed that there was going to be a guilty verdict. I don't think people realized that there could be an acquittal at the time. And I think that probably had a lot to do with it. From the Korean American perspective, however, for those of us who were in Koreatown, I was one of those people who was in the car and heard on the radio that the LAPD had asked the Korean American merchants in Koreatown to evacuate Koreatown. And I was one of those people that went to the radio station and pointed out to them that if we did, were leaving the city or the Koreatown that we had built over 25 years to the looters to burn and loot, and that we needed to protect ourselves.
As I was just listening to Dave's reflection, that really reminded me several things that I witnessed. I remember that day there was a radio, 24 hours. They were telling people where to go, where not to go, and they were just working around the clock. And I remember seeing on TV that many market owners, get their guns up and go on top of the roof and defend their own stores. What happened after that? I remember thousands of people, just miles of Korean people had a peace march on the street, and guess what? They rebuilt the Koreatown. They went back. Went through a very tough time for many years, but they rebuilt, and people got stronger, and they got united, and then they started, going really doing well in their ownership of the business, and they become more involved socially. And one area that we're still low on is, a political arena. It's very hard to get in, but I think it has come to a point after 20 years, they realized how important it is to get involved in politics. Just like what happened with me, that was my inspiration getting involved. But what I do is I go out and really advocate and motivate people to get involved politically, because this is one area when you're at the table, you can make a difference, you can make the change, you can make the community much better.
Mr. Kim, you produced a documentary about the LA riots. It was called Clash of Colors. What can viewers expect when they see this?
I wanted to make sure that the Korean American second generation and the future generation did not forget about what happened to the Korean American people in 1992. I felt the importance of making sure that we document the history for the second generation. And so I made the documentary in English language. I also wanted to see if I can, at the same time, give a proper perspective. I did not want it to be a story told among Korean Americans talking about what happened. And also I wanted the Korean Americans to know how Korean Americans responded to the situation, that we armed ourselves, we protected our town, and at the same time we had engaged in peaceful march and to express our opinion of what happened and to show our unity and strength. And I wanted to make sure that this was properly documented for our future generation.
I think race relations in Los Angeles is actually a little better than 20 years ago, because 20 years ago was a lot more tension.
I think in general, I think people get along in LA.
I think at that time, I don't know, there was a lot of miscommunication going on, not understanding each other, but I think since then, I haven't heard any problems, haven't noticed any problems.
I think race relations is getting better than before, because I had no problem getting along with people outside of my race.
Do African Americans still have a lot of anxiety and tension? and even animosity towards Korean American businesses.
I don't think you have it today as it was in '92, but again, you may have isolated incidents. I mean, there are things in which recently I was at a hearing about a Korean store owner that there was a number of residents or people who come in the community wanted to see him lose his liquor license. The main number of people that showed up to say, this is a good store, a good person, he gives us credit, he gives us gifts at Christmas, were members of the black community. When we had the incident in Haiti, Jan Perry, a councilman, and I stood in the middle of Main Street for 12 hours with a bucket collecting money for Haiti. Who brought a check for $130,000? At the end of that was Radio Korea. So there are many, many things that have changed, but I don't think we could ever say you have reached success, because I always view the minute you declare success, regression starts. And so incidents are always going to happen as long as there are human beings involved. But the key for all of us is not to make them collective to where you revert immediately and say, this is like 1992 or 1965. Deal with it as an incident as opposed to a collective view that nothing's changed and it's the same old thing.
I think there's also been a change in the Korean American or Korean merchants' perspective as well. I think that before the riots, I think a lot of Korean Americans or Korean immigrants who were doing businesses in South Central did not have the sensitivity to the racial issues, and they had they, for example, did not realize that their ability to come to this country and be engaged in this kind of business opportunities, even in South Central, was a byproduct of the civil rights movement, and that African Americans had accomplished certain or achieved certain civil rights, which allowed and paved the road for the Koreans to come here and be able to become part of the society. And I think in that respect, I think, and they also learned that that maybe their actions could be misconstrued or misunderstood, and that through this experience, I think they have become much more understanding of the cultural differences that exist, and it's the need for them to be sensitive to the African American history and their experiences.
How would each of you say the city has changed in the last 20 years?
Well, I think the dynamics of just the entire cultural issues, you have 125 languages spoken in the city of LA today. And you have people from first generation, second, third generations, and you look at communities that were viewed 20 years ago as primarily black communities. That transition has moved forward. You find that you can't survive in the city of LA without having a sensitivity of others' culture and an understanding. And clearly, within this city, coalitions are the only way that you survive in getting things done. And so I think the city is evolving constantly, but if you looked over the last 20 years, it's the explosion of cultures in this community.
92 was a lack of understanding. Over the last 19 years, we have built that momentum of being part of the society. That's something that we did not know then. But I think this is Los Angeles, Orange County is a tapestry of culture and tradition. We learn how to be more associated, and we create a town, the community, that's fulfilled by many walks of life. So that was the precious lesson. It was costly, it was very tragic, but we learned a big lesson how to be involved and how to be, work well with the other communities.
Mr. King, what do you think about all this in terms of, the changes, but also like what do you think needs to be done? Not in a political sense, but in a one-on-one, like individual sense.
People can come together like centers and get to know the neighborhood with different cultures, because that's what the United States is all about, and us being able to get together and share ideas and because I mean, before 91, it was a lot of tension when you walk in the stores. Now it's still tension, but it's different. Everybody, it seems like people want to more get to know and more understand. They want to understand the person more, as we move further on in our age and get older. But I really think that people need to, come together and be able to talk amongst each other throughout the communities at centers and places like that. And people themselves take the responsibility of going out that way to be kind, like we were put on this earth to be. I really admire and am pleased to be here in Los Angeles to be among people who are still working on getting relations with different nationalities to tighten it up to make a better city.
Can you speak to your future plans?
I do have plans to get some type of organization together, a nonprofit organization where it brings people of different nationalities together. If it's no more than just different nationalities get on the bike and we go around for a couple of miles and ride a bike, but just to get to be amongst each other. We don't have to speak the same language or anything like that. But in my mind, those are things that would be nice. We walk away, go our own separate ways, but it would be nice to have some type of little me do my part and have a little foundation where I get people together. We go for a bike or we go for a hike, something. That's my plans.
I think after 45 years in public service, I think I figured it out that if you could raise healthy, educated children, you've solved most of the dilemmas in society. I put a good deal of my energies in the city council is figuring out ways that we can expose young people to educational activities. How can we ensure that we get them the tools that they need, whether we're moving forward to get libraries to stay open, or we are sending funds so they could travel on a robotics conference. You find ways to where you concentrate on young people getting exposed to activities, and you find a remarkable transition of young people learning about life beyond the four corners of their block.
My term ends next year, and who knows, after that might have another opportunity to go up, do something else. But I think the bottom line that I want to say to the public and to the viewer is that it all depends on what you think. So let's think positive. Let's move on the wounds of 1992 and build a community that is large and strong. We are almost about 2.5 million strong in this country. It's a power. It's a possibility of power is incumbent upon everyone who wants to aspire to succeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's just go out and work hard and become part of this fabric of this great community.
I happen to think that the United States has entered one of the most difficult times it is going to go through. And I believe that the people who are going to be bearing the brunt of the difficult times is the people that have less political power, less economic power. One of the things that I'd like to be able to do in light of the 1992 riots is to be able to get our young people to recognize that we are a member of minorities in this country, and that we need to work with other minority groups, and that their well-being is our well-being. Most of our businesses still cater to the minority groups, and they're the ones who are going to be suffering the most with the downsizing of the government. They're the ones who are going to be suffering from the lack of safety net. And in these times, if we can teach our young people to take the leadership role in working with other minority groups so that we can coexist and that we could be model minority, I'd like to be able to contribute to that kind of effort.
Well, thank you so much, each of you, for coming in and joining us today.
Thank you.